Let us now discuss literature part of TRT examination. As we all know, literature has different components like prose, poetry, drama, novel, and all these aspects we have for this examination as well. Though at school level, but this literature part deals in detail. So that means our preparation for this particular topic must be little more serious, deeper than the other parts. So what do we mean by literature basically? Literature comes from the human life, all the developments that take place in the world, in the various continents, countries, societies will come into the textual form by the great poets, authors, writers, playwrights and all. So we have all the human life related situations in literature part, whether it is a poetry part or a prose part or a short story or a novel or a drama. So that the knowledge of this literature will help us, especially the students, to look at life in a different perspective so that they can lead their life in a better way. That is one idea of introducing literature at this level. And when we are dealing with the examinations as far as this syllabus is concerned, let us look at the various aspects of it. For example, we will start with comprehension of prose. So for this examination, we have comprehension of prose and poetry. That means these two components will test our ability to understand the given prose passage and the given poetry passage, and we need to understand, not only understand, but we need to answer appropriately to prove that we have a capability of, competency of teaching these aspects to the students. That is the main idea of any examination. And when we look at this comprehension of prose, this is little bit easier compared to poetry part. Now let us look at the comprehension of prose passage. So we would get some passages in the examinations. We can understand the passage, but the major problem in the examinations is time constraint. We need to understand and answer the given passages within that stipulated time. For that, we must have regular reading of these kind of passages. There is no shortcut actually for this. Rather, one should have regular reading habit, whether it is prose or poetry. So let us now look at few points. How to comprehend. Comprehend means how to understand that given textual topic. To master literature and to gain competence in communication, it is important to be able to understand the written text. Why should we understand why these topics are tested in the examinations is not only to master literature, the text, but also to gain competence in communication. Communication skills lo competence పెరగడానికి టెస్ట్ చేస్తారు. Then second point is, usually the passages given for comprehension are unseen, unknown, unfamiliar. తెలియని ప్యాసేజ్లే ఉంటాయి. తెలిసిన ప్యాసేజ్ అయితే జనరల్లీ we can easily understand and write. So here the purpose of testing is to check the quick comprehension of any given passage or poem. So that's the reason we should keep this point in mind, that those passages, comprehension passages, will be completely unseen and unknown. Second aspect is, it will be unfamiliar to the reader also. So, they will be from different backgrounds. We cannot think of, cannot guess of. That is another complexity of comprehension. So that we can be ready to read the given passages. Mostly to say, we need to be ready to face unknown passage in the examination. Then there are certain types of questions in comprehension. Mostly, one would be multiple choice questions. Second would be one-line answer questions. Third would be true or false type questions. And the fourth would be questions based on grammar and vocabulary. So, when it comes to prose passage, so it would be about a particular literary piece, particular literary article, any article related to some particular literature. So, we need to understand the author's perspective there, especially when we read it, and what exactly the author is trying to convey, and what are his or her views in the passage. So, we need to focus on these aspects. So, while doing and dealing with comprehension passages, we must have these kind of questions in our mind. While reading itself, we must question ourselves, who is the speaker, who is the narrator, and what is his or her important points in the passages. Then it would be a little easier for us to understand and then answer appropriately. I would call these passages in any examination as jackpot. Jackpot in the sense you can and you have the scope of scoring full marks in the passages. I mean comprehension passages, especially comprehension prose. Why I call it a jackpot? Because you have the passage there in your hand in the examination hall, and you have questions there, and if you can quickly understand, you can cross check your answers there. Whereas in other questions, it is not possible for us to check our answers. So in a way, that means if we are a little careful about these passages, we can score 100% marks in the given comprehension type passages. So please keep this point in mind. And another point, when we read, definitely we think that yes, I do not know this passage, and how do I understand, how do I answer? I don't know whether the answer would be right. Fine. This problem will be faced by all the candidates who take the examination. Let it be any examination. Then we must have, as a participant of literature, as a teacher of literature, as a student of literature, whatever, we must have interest in reading the unknown. So we must be happy to read the given passage. Another very important point to be kept in mind. Definitely it will be unknown. So one should not be shaken when there is a unknown passage there. That means the very purpose of conducting this test itself is to give unknown. I hope you understood this point. And then accordingly, there are certain methods actually to answer these passages. One method is to, while reading itself, underline or note down the keywords in a rough sheet, so that it would be easy for us to locate the particular line of the answer for a particular question. So most of us generally read the passage, then we go to the questions, then again we search for it. That would be a little laborious, time-taking process. So whatever it is, if we can save our time, if we can answer appropriately, that method can be chosen. Then there are certain questions based on grammar and vocabulary as well. For example, questions like identifying words. There would be questions on comprehension passage. That means a question may be asked to identify a particular word, and there may be a question about the parts of speech of the given passage. There would be a question on the synonyms. Maybe the synonym of the word in the passage will be given, and we must try to identify its synonym. That means our previous knowledge of synonyms, our previous knowledge of parts of speech, our previous knowledge of vocabulary will help us in these examinations as well as in this comprehension passage. And also there would be a question on antonyms. Again, a particular word would be chosen from the passage, and a question may be on selecting the antonym for the given. So we may get a doubt actually. So how do I know the synonyms of the given passage related words? How do I know the antonyms of the words of the passage? Yes, that's a valid question. Yes, when we read a passage, when we go through the passage, we can easily understand the central theme of the passage. That means if they are talking about a political scenario, then we understand. If they are talking about a medical research paper, we can understand. If they are talking about a economical research paper, then we can understand. That means all those words are related to that particular field. So that central theme will also help us in answering synonyms related questions and antonym related questions. So what I am trying to say is our previous knowledge, that means we must have a good vocabulary. If we can have good vocabulary, we can read faster and we can understand faster, we can answer quickly by saving time, and we can score better by being the toppers. So please recollect all the vocabulary that you have. Refresh, brush up your vocabulary. Vocabulary will help to some extent. And there is another aspect there in passages is you will come across many unknown vocabulary items also. Then how do I answer? Yes. The problem is it is unknown, but the theme of the passage will help me. Even if I don't belong to that particular field, whether it is medicine or engineering or architecture, but the theme, central theme, will definitely help me in understanding that. Please don't forget this point, because this is a common complaint. Many people say we can understand, but whenever an unknown word comes into picture, then we cannot understand. That's one. And if second point of tackling vocabulary related questions in the passage is our previous knowledge, our new knowledge of vocabulary will also help us. Then third question may be on one word substitutes related one. That means they may pick up any one word substitute from the passage, or they may pick up a situation from the passage and ask us to select its related one word substitute. So what do you mean by one word substitute? For example, parts of speech we know, synonyms, same meaning words, antonyms we know, opposite meaning words. And then one word substitute means an expression which has only one word or a single word for a longer meaning or expression. So we have lots of such one word substitutes in English language. For example, polyglot. Polyglot, poly and glot. Someone who knows many languages, or someone who can speak many languages. This is, for example, one example for one word substitutes. So if we can already have a good knowledge of one word substitutes, then our job of understanding, our job of answering the passage, especially the comprehension passage, will be easier. So please keep it in mind. So what I am trying to say is, whatever we are learning separately, individually in language and literature, definitely they are interlinked, interconnected, so that whatever we learn will definitely help us come to our rescue when we tackle any particular aspect of the examination. Then after one word substitutes related questions, we may also have questions related to idioms or idiomatic expressions. So we need to know what you mean by these idioms. Idioms, in a way, we can say an expression in English which may or may not have literal meaning. For example, we have cakewalk, hot potato. There are so many idiomatic expressions. So our knowledge of idiomatic expressions will definitely help in answering some of the questions. But you have learned lot of idiomatic expressions, but you may get 1 or 2 questions based on it. Yes, in a competitive examination, every mark counts. For 1 mark, we need to put in lots of effort. So all the things, all the vocabulary items that you have been learning for the past so many years will definitely get fruits when you write any examination. So please continue upgrading your knowledge of idioms, interest in idioms, so that would help you in many ways, not in one way. So that is one. Another one, phrases related questions, phrasal verbs related questions. So group of words which give again a specialized meaning. So our previous knowledge of these phrasal verbs or phrases will also help if at all there is a question. So we cannot say whether you will get questions related to all these aspects, but there is a possibility. That means we need to be ready with all these kinds of grammar related, vocabulary related. When we didn't discuss parts of speech related, there might be a question, identify the parts of speech of a particular word, like noun or adjective or adverb. So please brush up your knowledge of parts of speech thoroughly and brush up synonyms that brush up antonyms that and also one word substitutes, and idiomatic expressions and phrases, etc. So in a way we can say every bit that we learn about vocabulary or grammar will in a way will definitely help us in passages as well. Or we can say our knowledge of good vocabulary will definitely help us in understanding the passage quickly, faster. So please focus on this. So then let's now move on to another point, that questions test our understanding of the text. Okay. That means questions are framed in such a way that whether the reader understood the concept, main concept of the given passage. So that is one. That means please do not expect a easier and a direct question. There would be definitely a twist in it. And then there is another point here to be mentioned is, first read the passage number of times. If we have a habit of reading passages or articles or books regularly in English, then I think we will not have a trouble in understanding the given passage in less time. Otherwise, if we can have fast reading habits, then also it would be better to read the passage thoroughly and quickly, if possible, if time permits, more than once. But mostly you may not have that much time because you have other items also in the examination. And then after the comprehension of prose, let's now discuss on comprehension of poetry, which is little complex, difficult than the prose. Prose you can understand, you may have a little problem, but poetry is little challenging as well. This part is different and difficult from prose passage. And then we need to understand its literal meaning. What we need to do in comprehension of poetry is we need to understand its literal meaning and its symbolic and figurative meaning as well, because a poem will have some kind of a symbol. It represents some symbol. That is what we say, symbolic meaning and a figurative meaning, right? And then a poem has simile. So what is a simile? I think most of us, if we can go through the text, school text, it is wonderfully in a simpler way, better way is defined about all these aspects. So what is a simile, for example? It's a direct comparison where you use words such as like or as or seemed or as if or as though. So we use, that means we use these words like when you compare, okay? And then we need to observe this particular aspect in a given poem, whether it has any such similes. Then quickly we should expect a question based on simile. Then we see this verbal device actually. Then we also have another aspect of poetical passage, that is metaphor. A poem has metaphor. What is a metaphor? That is an indirect comparison of two objects is called metaphor. In simile, you use the link word as this looks like, this is as though, this seemed, you use. Whereas in this, we can say in a way, metaphor is a higher level of comparison than simile. Then it is also a poetic comparison. We do not see verbal device but implied meaning. That means you don't find a direct meaning there, you find the implied meaning or indirect meaning. That we need to understand, which is little difficult actually. So, to understand a given poem in the passage manner, that we need to have the basic knowledge of all the components of poem actually, and then we must read some poems from different backgrounds. So, we will know, because some poems are simple to understand, some are complex. So, that is the reason, please go through some poets' poems and analyze, try to understand. So, initially we may have difficulty in understanding a poem, but if you gradually read some, then you can easily understand. Please make it a habit of reading poems actually. Not only for the examination, but a poem will help developing one's critical and creative thinking levels. And then we have another important aspect of poetic passages or a poem is personification. I think we can easily understand from the very word personification. That means attributing the personal qualities to non-human beings, non-living things especially, right? It also means an abstract noun is used as a person. Abstract idea is imagined to have life. Fine, this is very important. Means you are giving living qualities to a non-living thing. So, in a poem we need to understand when we read itself, is there anything? So, we should quickly think of that. Is the poet talking about a person there or non-living thing there? Then why the non-living thing is compared to the human there? Why the non-living thing is given the human qualities, like it is looking at me, it is laughing at me, it is giving some kind of a human emotions. So, immediately we must make a note of that when we are in the examination hall in the rough sheet, because all such things will again would be asked in the question form. So, it would be better while reading itself we should question ourselves, what is this particular part and is there a possibility of asking about this part? So, then it would save our time in the examination. That means we must do two things while reading a passage, whether it is a prose or a poem. That means while reading, try to understand, at the same time what would be tested in the particular examination must also be kept in mind actually. This parallel work we must do, then we can save time and we can do better than others. For example, personification example, death, do not be proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. So, here the poet is referring to death as a person. The way we talk to people, we say, do not be proud man. Then here the poet is telling the death, do not be proud. Death is not a living thing actually. It is not a personal, right? But here this is person. So, death is compared actually here to a person, right? And it is giving, it is continued and discussed there. Fine. So, we need to understand what is personified, what particular aspect is tested or in this aspect of personification. So, we must observe. And then we have other figures of speech apart from those. One is symbols and the other is images. These two are prominently used in a poem. That means understanding, comprehending a poem is little typical, complex, challenging. At the same time, it is interesting if we read some poems daily, if we can try to comprehend some poems daily. We need not understand the whole poem. We need not understand each and every word of the poem. First of all, we need to understand the central theme. There would be definitely a question on the central theme. Then later on, these similes, metaphors, personification and symbols. For example, bird. If a particular poem has a bird, then the bird symbolizes freedom there. Whether you are talking about a child in a school or a bird, that means you are talking about in other way about freedom. Whether that freedom is given or freedom is stolen, freedom is taken or freedom is restricted, whatever. So we should immediately think of that if there is a poem there. That means, we need to understand the poetic terms very carefully, right? And then another example can be cage symbolizes bondage. If a cage is mentioned, that means you have restricted the movement of that particular aspect, whether it is a child or a person or anything. So we must immediately get the picture of that. That's why we call images, right? And then river symbolizes continuity. If river is mentioned in the poem, that means river continuously passes through, right? So if something is continuing, then a river is used. So we must actually think of it. We should get that point to the mind actually. These are few examples. Most of the poems will have different kinds of symbols, different kinds of images. So here we are trying to just give an idea. So when we read, we should quickly think of it. That means our focus must be serious when we are dealing with poetic passage, because it has lots of complex things at this level. And then another example can be colors symbolize different kinds of moods and emotions of we people. So every color has its own meaning there. Fine. So we must focus on these things. Whenever we get such symbols, then we must make a note of it on the rough sheet and just quickly think of it. And in the first reading we may not. The problem with poem is it's very difficult for us, for anyone to understand in the first reading itself. That's the complexity that we should accept. So that means we must continuously read these poems to get the hold on understanding the poem actually. Please collect some poems of your favorite authors or poets and then try to analyze, try to comprehend, try to identify these elements, then you will know. Then another component of poetic appreciation or a poetic comprehension is rhyme scheme. Some poems written in a particular period have rhyme scheme, some may not have. So second thing is we must look at the rhyme scheme. Then what is this rhyme scheme? Rhyme scheme is nothing but arrangement of similar sounds at the end of each line in a stanza. That means we must quickly look at every stanza. And we missed another point, that is when we look at the poem, we must first quickly look at the external features of the poem. That means how many stanzas we have and how many lines each stanza has. Is there any disorder in the stanzaic order? We must observe. After that, we should go to every stanza, then look at the last words of every line, then check whether there is a rhyme scheme. That means similar sound pattern. For example, so you may have band, land, so they rhyme each other. Sand, bland, they rhyme each other. Fear, near, dear, they rhyme each other. So we must observe that. And when we find two similar sound patterns in one stanza, we generally represent it with small a, small a. In the same stanza, we may have different similar sound pattern. Then we should represent it as small b and small b. It goes on like this. Then in the next stanza, we may have small c and small c. So, and this rhyme scheme can be in the first, second line or a first, third line. So, we must carefully observe. Definitely there would be a question whether it has a rhyme scheme, and if at all it has, what kind of a rhyme scheme. And there would be a question also, what do you call that particular rhyme scheme. So, we must observe this. Poetry is an art. It is an art. It gives joy to people who read it. And this poetry can be simple or complex. So, it would be appropriate to say that if I say I understood the poem in the first reading, that means if I say I understood, that means I did not understand. So, any wonderful art cannot be understood easily. We must focus, we must try to analyze and then understand, go deeper, then only we can understand a little. Fine. Then poetry has several elements and aspects. Then let us now spend some time on poetic appreciation. That means how to appreciate a poem. A very, very, very interesting aspect this is. Because there is a major complaint. Many people they say, yes, we have interest in reading poetry, but when we start reading, we cannot understand. The vocabulary is so difficult, sometimes age-old vocabulary. And then in the examination, when we find this poetic test, then we worry that we may not get marks there, we may lose. So, for that purpose, let us now look at it. Why should we appreciate a poem and how we can appreciate a poem? Point number one is, it is all about what we see. We should look at the poem, external feature, then internal feature. Sometimes in poems like imagist poetry, the poem will be represented in the form of the theme. For example, if there is a poem about duck, the textual representation will be in the design of a duck. That means you can easily say, yes, this poem is about a duck, all about duck. So, it goes on. If it is about a tree, then in imagist poetry, the textual representation will be in the form of a tree. That means that image will tell us that this poem is going to be about the tree, its benefits, its uses. And second point is what we hear. That means it has a sound too. Sometimes they are rhythmic. They have rhyme and they have rhythm. It will develop a musical, effect when we read it loudly. And sometimes the other aspect is what we feel. How do we appreciate a poem? Yes, the understanding of a poem will differ from person to person. It all depends on their own perspectives. So, mostly in the examinations, there would be questions on poet's point of view, at the same time reader's point of view. It may be asked, what do you understand, what do you feel about it? So, please be ready to have your own opinion also when you are reading a poem. Try to understand poet's point of view, then try to understand what you can derive out of it. Though it looks little complex, it's quite interesting dealing with poetry. And then another point about poetic appreciation is what we understand. Sometimes it may be represented in a simpler words, but it may have a deeper meaning. Sometimes complex words, sometimes broken punctuation. For example, there is one poem, the title is What if a much of a witch of a wind. In this title actually, the poet did not follow any punctuation. No capital letter in the beginning, no comma at appropriate point, no semicolon, no full stop. totally broken. So, we must understand why the poet has given such a broken, a title. That means definitely he would be dealing with something broken in the world, some disaster in the world, some disorder that took place in the world. That poem was about a war and aftermath of war, after effect of war. So, what we understand is also important. No poet will give a title that easily. Title will help. No poet will give a particular line without any reason. So, we must try to find out the reason behind that. Leave if you cannot understand particular words. Please remember this point. If you cannot understand some words in the poem, don't worry. Try to catch up the central line, central theme of the poem. You would definitely understand that this poem is about war, or this poem is about human relations, or this poem is about a schoolboy, this poem is about a woman suffering, and all. Once we understand this, it would be easier for us to understand the other aspects. And one more submission here is, after reading the poem, you try to understand something, but still you think that yes, I could not understand it completely. Then in the examination hall, questions will also help you in understanding it better, much better. So please read the poem once, go to the questions, and again go back to poem. You may have a doubt, do we have that much time in the examination hall? Yes. If we can read regularly, our speed of comprehension will be faster. Then we can easily finish within the given time, going through the poem, going to the questions, and going back to poem, and then answering. It is possible, but it needs rigorous and regular, sincere practice of reading and understanding poems, as many as possible. Please do not prepare for only the sake of examination. Are you getting me? We must understand, we must appreciate, we must enjoy the poem, so that we can also make our students tomorrow understand, appreciate, and enjoy the poem. Then, if that has happened, then I think the student will also develop interest in poetry, and he would also write in whatever way it is possible for them. So, ultimate aim is to make them also enjoy and write something. Then, continuing this poetic appreciation, the other aspect is the language used is important. We must look at the particular language used by a particular poet. That poet will definitely use those words and the language because it is suitable, it is needed, it is apt, it is appropriate for that particular poem. So, please examine the language used, and that could be the question as well. Then, choice of words. A poet would use particular words for different reasons, different purposes. So, we must observe. Sometimes there will be a repetition, sometimes there will be a punctuational break, a lot of things. We must try to understand why poet has done this in the particular piece of poem or poetry. Then we should also look at arrangement of words to understand a poem. How the words have been arranged. There is a meaning for that. Please look at it. Then we can really appreciate a poem. We can really understand a poem. And then words and their sounds, another very interesting. Some poems will have sound effects. That means when you read it, it will produce sound, and that sound will have some kind of a sense and a meaning and a rhythm as well. And then one more important submission here is, do not get confused with words. Are you getting me? To avoid this problem, we need poetic experience. That means get into the situation of the poem to understand it. We should not get confused with words, very important thing. Not only in poem, in prose also many students have this problem actually. They want to read, they want to understand, but when an unknown word comes first in the line, then they stop. So here also we should be careful there. Don't get carried away by the words alone. Get the poetic experience. Try to understand what the poet is trying to say, what kind of a circumstances that he or she wrote. Then only we can have that. We should empathize actually. We should get into that situation. We should get into that background. Then only we can understand. Otherwise we cannot. It is not, we can say that it is not that easy to understand and appreciate a poem the way we understand a prose passage. It doesn't mean that prose passage is easy. It will have its own complexity, but comprehension of poem is more complex. Then we need to understand another component of a poem is irony. What is irony? It's a complex concept. That means the poet, she or he, says something and suggests or implies something else. Ironic, we say. So we need to understand. If we don't think deeply, we cannot understand. So there would be questions on ironical, aspect in the poem. So when we read a poem in the examination, please identify what the poet is trying to convey through different ways. Sometimes a direct conveying, sometimes indirect. So we must observe and what exactly that implied meaning is. And these, saying or a discussion will often be opposite. That is the irony. Generally we say, we think that life is a bed of roses, but when you go through life, you will find thorns also in the life. That means life will not be that easy as we expect or as we wish, as we hope. We have to come across many unknown hurdles, unexpected hurdles where you shake. So that is the irony of life in a way. So that means unknown, unexpected development or unexpected meaning there. Fine. For example, we can take this. The grave is a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. So if the poet is talking about grave is fine, good, and it's a private place, no one will be there, but no one will go there to meet, sit and discuss sweeter things. Are you getting me? It may be good, clean, well maintained, but that is not the place. Graveyard is not the place to discuss, good and positive things there. That's irony. That means, yes, so many good situations, but that situation may not be suitable to discuss the other things. So we must observe this irony part in the poem. If at all the particular poet employed this particular aspect. And let us now look at the aims of poetic appreciation. Why should I do it? Why should I appreciate? And what is the connection of poetic appreciation and the examination there? Yes, when we understand, when we appreciate the poem, then only we can answer the questions given. In a way, examiner will test your critical thinking skill, your typical creative skill. So, to know the meaning of a few basic terms like rhyme, rhythm, paradox, why should I appreciate? How should I do it is, we should know the rhyme aspect of a poem, rhythmic aspect of the poem, paradox aspect of the poem. And we should also remember that poetry is a pleasurable art. Please do not have any, negative opinions about a poem. It's a pleasurable art. It's a verbal art as well. It's a play of words a particular poet employs. So we should also have a pleasure in reading that, because the poet has taken pleasure in arranging those things. Only to amuse us, only to entertain us, only to make us think deeply about a particular issue. And the poet wants our serious attention, focused attention, because it's a very important aspect a poet would be raising through his or her poem or poetry. So a poem embodies poetry. That means a poem has all the poetic elements there. So I can only understand that if I get into that world of poetry, if I know all the poetic devices there. I must look at the poetic devices there. And a poem can be read and appreciated in more than one way. Yes, I may understand the poem in one way and you may understand in a different way. Your friend may understand it in a different way. So each one of us will have a different appreciation. Though the central theme would be the same, but our understanding of the poem depends on our level of thinking. For example, as a 10th class student, if I read that poem, I would understand little. As a graduate, if I read the same poem, I will understand more. As a teacher, if I read it, I will understand more. So it depends. So there is no fixed point about the particular appreciation of a particular poem. The more deeper you get into it, you will know. So it's an enjoyable aspect actually. So while reading the poem itself, try to understand, try to identify, try to get into that world of the poet, then you will understand it thoroughly. Without involving into that, you cannot understand. So in a way we can say that poetic passage will demand your complete attention. Then I think you would definitely answer all the questions properly, thoroughly, accurately, and you would stand on the toppers list. Then poetic textual analysis, we need to analyze. Yes, how to analyze? It can be carried out at 3 levels. One level is phonological level, second is structural level, and third is semantic level. Let us now quickly discuss about phonological. As the very word itself says phono, that means related to sound. That means a poem will have patterns of sounds and rhythm there. We must understand. Oh, what is that sound? Drumming. So sound and drum sound and continuation sound, all these things will convey something. So identify if a given poem has phonological effect. How do I know? Quickly read little louder, because in the examination you cannot read it loudly, but a little louder you can just for yourself read in such a way that you can listen to your sound. Just check it. And then identify, if at all you have that phonological elements, identify that. Second is structural aspect. A poem will also have structural aspect. That means its arrangement, its grammatical items and patterns also convey something. It will have a connection to the theme of the poem. So we must observe whether it has a structure. That means a poem may or may not have phonological aspect. Just we need to observe. A poem may or may not have structural aspect. We must observe. While reading, while going through the poem itself, we must look at it actually. If it is there, if you find it, then quickly make a note in the rough side. So that when you make a note of all this, you will be wondering, when you look at the questions, you will definitely have a question based on it. The question can be, do you have any phonological, do you have any sound related patterns there? Do you have any rhythm related points there in the question, in the poem actually, then you can say yes. And then what is it could be the second question. Structural, grammatical points. Just now we discussed that one poem did not follow any grammatical element, did not follow any punctuational aspect. Some poems will follow strictly, that means they talk about a serious matter. Sometimes it is immaterial for the poet to follow grammatical elements. So, a poet will decide whether to employ, use, structure, phonological or semantic element to convey his or her selected point or a theme. It depends. So, that we must observe. Then what do we mean by the third level? After phonological and structural level, third level. Three basic levels will help us in appreciating a poem actually. So, semantic and stylistic level, third level. So, what do you mean by semantics? Semantics is nothing but meaning related actually. One is sound related, second is structure, grammatical pattern related, third is meaning related. That means study the forms of words, like you may have parallels in the poem, you may have contrasts in the poem, you may have similes in the poem, you may have metaphor in the poem, you may have personification in the poem, you may have imagery, you may also have irony there, you may have paradox there, you may have song there, you may have sonnet there, you may have an elegy, you may have an ode, you may have drama there, you may have description there, you may have narration, and you may have reflection, you may also have conversation. So, all these aspects convey some kind of a meaning, whether it is simile or metaphor. To give deeper meaning, these poetic devices are employed, like comparisons or contrasts, personification. So, these all come under this. And then we have, whereas literary forms category in poetry, the next level is, what kind of a poem that is. Is it a sonnet? Is it an ode? Is it an elegy? Is it a ballad? Or is it a lyric or a dramatic monologue? So, a poem may have different forms like this. So, we must have a knowledge of what a sonnet is, what an ode is, what an elegy is, what a ballad is, what a lyric is, what a dramatic monologue is. Then there would be a question on it. What do you call this kind of a poem? How many lines you have? 14 lines. What? How many lines you have in every stanza? 4 quadrate. So, all these aspects we must keep it in mind. Sonnet, for example, got another name, Shakespearean sonnet, because Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, has written n number of sonnets. So, that name, right. And ode, elegy, ballad, a song kind of a poem. Elegy, you write a poem about the sorry state of situation, like sad situation and all. So, we have certain poets who have used these particular literary forms, and also like dramatic monologues. As the very word itself says, dramatic, it is really dramatic. A sudden, unexpected situation you would come across in a dramatic monologue. That means it's only a one person, single log speech. Only one person speaks, but he speaks in such a way that there is an audience, and also he would exhibit different kinds of emotions, different kinds of roles there. And it will also have a dramatic change. At the end you will find unexpected, climax there. So, we would discuss in detail about these things in the examination point of view in the next episodes.